Victoria Hale had everything: a billion-dollar empire, a name that moved markets, a future mapped out by powerful men in expensive suits. But on a Tuesday night in Charleston, standing in the rain outside a half-finished house on Birchwood Lane, none of it mattered. The man answering the door wasn't impressed by her last name. He didn't know her stock price. He just saw a woman holding a flashlight, soaking wet, looking more lost than any billionaire should. What happened next would cost her everything she'd built, or give her everything she'd never known she wanted. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Daniel Mercer had learned to measure time differently since becoming a single father. Not in hours or days, but in small victories. Emma eating her vegetables without a fight, a client deadline met while she colored at his feet, the rare night when she fell asleep before 8, and he could sit on the porch with a beer and pretend he had his life together. Tonight was supposed to be one of those nights. The October air in Charleston carried that particular weight that comes just before fall, really settles in, when the heat hasn't quite given up, but the evenings start hinting at something cooler. Daniel sat on the front steps of his house, calling it a house felt generous, even to himself, and stared at the disaster he had voluntarily signed up for 3 weeks ago. Birchwood Lane. The name had sounded charming when the realtor showed him the listing. A real fixer-upper opportunity in one of Charleston's most prestigious neighborhoods, she'd said, conveniently glossing over the fact that fixer-upper meant borderline condemned, and prestigious meant you'll be the poorest person on the block by a factor of about $10 million. But the price had been right, barely. And the location meant good schools for Emma, and Daniel had spent enough years in Chicago's cutthroat architecture scene to know that prestige was just another word for miserable. He'd take a half-collapsed porch and honest work over another minute in Richard Morrison's firm, designing soulless glass towers for tech companies with names that sounded like prescription medications. The house groaned behind him, settling in that way old houses do, like an elderly person lowering themselves into a chair. Daniel took a long pull from his beer and added "check foundation" to the mental list that never seemed to get shorter. His phone buzzed. Emma's school. His stomach dropped in that instantaneous way every single parent knows. "Mr. Mercer? This is Linda from Little Oaks Academy. Nothing's wrong," the voice said quickly, and Daniel's heart rate dropped from cardiac arrest levels down to merely elevated. "I just wanted to remind you about the parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 3. We have you down for 3:15. Right, 3:15, I'll be there." "Wonderful. Emma's doing great, by the way, really adjusting well to the move." Daniel thanked her and hung up, making a note in his phone, because if he didn't write it down immediately, it would vanish into the black hole where all important information went to die. Emma was adjusting well. He was the one still fumbling, still unpacking boxes at midnight, still discovering that half the electrical outlets in the house didn't work, and the previous owner had apparently believed that building codes were merely suggestions. He'd chosen this, left the 6-figure salary, the corner office with views of Lake Michigan, the entire life he'd built with Claire before cancer had taken her, and left him with a 4-year-old daughter and a grief so vast it had its own gravitational pull. The porch light flickered, another thing for the list, and Daniel was just considering calling it a night when he saw her. She was walking up his driveway, which was odd because nobody walked up his driveway. In the 3 weeks since he'd moved in, he'd met exactly 2 neighbors. Gerald, a retired dentist who'd complained about Daniel's contractor parking on the street, and a woman named Patricia, who'd brought over a casserole that Emma wouldn't touch because it had green things in it. This woman wasn't Gerald or Patricia. She moved with the kind of careful precision that suggested high heels on uneven pavement, and as she got closer, Daniel could make out an elegant charcoal suit, dark hair pulled back, and something in her hand that caught the porch light. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular accent that rich people had. Not quite Southern, not quite anywhere else, just expensive. "I'm sorry to bother you so late." Daniel stood up, suddenly aware that he was in paint-stained jeans and a t-shirt that had definitely seen better days. "No bother. Can I help you?" She stopped at the bottom of the steps, and in the weak yellow glow of his dying porch light, Daniel got his first real look at her. Mid-30s maybe. Beautiful in that way that came from good genetics and probably a personal trainer and definitely better life choices than his. But there was something in her eyes, a tiredness that no amount of expensive skincare could hide. "I think this might be yours," she said, holding up a flashlight. I found it in my yard. Given that you're the newest arrival on the block, and this looks like a contractor's equipment, I thought I'd return it. Daniel recognized it immediately. Mike's flashlight, his contractor, who had a habit of leaving tools everywhere like some kind of construction-themed Easter egg hunt. That's definitely ours. Thank you. He came down the steps to take it, and as he got closer, he caught the faint scent of something expensive and floral. I'm Daniel. Daniel Mercer, just moved in. Victoria Hale. She offered her hand, and her grip was firm, businesslike. I live next door. Next door. Daniel's next-door neighbor was the massive estate with the iron gates and the driveway that looked like it belonged to a hotel. He'd assumed it was owned by some old money family, or maybe a celebrity trying to avoid attention. The big house? He said, then immediately regretted how that sounded. I mean, yes, the big house. A slight smile crossed her face. The first break in what Daniel was starting to realize was a very carefully maintained composure. I promise we're not as intimidating as the gates suggest. My security team insists on them. Security team. Right. Because that's a normal thing. Normal people had. Well, I appreciate you bringing this back. Most people would have just tossed it or kept it. I'm not most people, Victoria said, and there was something in the way she said it. Not arrogant, just factual, like she was stating her height or her name. An awkward silence settled between them, the kind that usually preceded goodbyes. But Victoria didn't move. She just stood there, looking up at his disaster of a house with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. It's got good bones, she said finally. That's what everyone says right before they tell me I should have hired an inspector who actually knew what they were doing. That earned him a real smile, small but genuine. I meant it. These old Charleston houses, they can take a beating and still stand. It's the new construction you have to worry about. All facade, nothing structural. She said it like she knew, not like someone who'd read it in a magazine, but like someone who'd learned it the hard way. Are you in construction? Daniel asked. Technology, actually, but I've renovated enough buildings to know the difference between cosmetic damage and real problems. She paused. That porch, though, that's a real problem. Daniel laughed, a genuine sound that surprised him. Yeah, I'm aware, it's on the list. The list gets longer before it gets shorter. Is that from experience? Years of it. She shifted her weight, and Daniel noticed for the first time that she looked uncomfortable in the heels, like she'd been wearing them too long. I bought this place 8 years ago. It was a disaster. Everyone told me to tear it down and start fresh, but I couldn't do it. Too much history. I know the feeling. Daniel gestured to his house. This place isn't much to look at, but Emma, my daughter, she loved it the second she saw it. Said it looked like a house from a storybook. How old is she? 4. Going on 40, if you ask her teachers. Victoria's expression softened in a way that made her look younger, more real. I remember being 4. Everything seemed possible. Before Daniel could respond, the porch light gave one final flicker and died completely, plunging them into the softer darkness of the streetlights and the moon. And that, Daniel said, is my cue to add replace porch light to the list. I should let you go, Victoria said, already stepping back. I'm sure you have an early morning. 6 a.m. wake-up call courtesy of a 4-year-old who thinks weekends are a myth. Then I definitely should go. But she hesitated again, just for a second. It was nice meeting you, Daniel. You too, Victoria. She walked back down the driveway, her silhouette disappearing into the darkness, and Daniel stood there for a moment longer than necessary, flashlight in hand, wondering why that brief conversation had felt more substantial than most of the interactions he'd had in the past year. He went inside, locked the door, and checked on Emma, still asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit like it might escape in the night. Then he sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by unpacked boxes and unfinished plans, and thought about the tired eyes of a woman who lived in a mansion and apparently knew about porch repair some. The next morning arrived exactly as predicted. 6 a.m. Emma's small hand shaking his shoulder, her voice announcing that she was hungry and also that Mr. Hoppy, the rabbit, needed breakfast too. Daniel stumbled through the morning routine on autopilot. Cereal, cartoons, the battle over wearing actual shoes instead of her princess slippers to school. By the time he dropped her off at Little Oaks Academy, He'd already answered 17 questions, prevented one minor disaster involving orange juice and the couch, and consumed enough coffee to wake a small army. The parent-teacher conference wasn't until 3:15, which gave him exactly 6 hours to make progress on the Riverside Plaza project, a small commercial development that was supposed to be his fresh start as an independent architect. The client, Marcus Webb, was a local developer who'd taken a chance on Daniel based on his portfolio and a recommendation from a mutual friend. No pressure, just Daniel's entire professional reputation riding on delivering something that didn't look like every other cookie-cutter strip mall in America. He spent the morning at the kitchen table, his makeshift office, sketching, revising, cursing the limitations of the budget, and trying to create something meaningful within the constraints of zoning laws, and Marcus's request for modern, but not too modern, you know? Around noon, his phone rang. Mike, the contractor. "We got a problem," Mike said, which was his favorite way to start every conversation. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where the main water line is older than my grandmother and needs to be replaced before it decides to redecorate your basement." Daniel closed his eyes. "How much?" "8 grand, maybe 9 if we run into complications." "Which we will." "Which we absolutely will," Mike agreed cheerfully. "But hey, look at it this way. At least we found it before it burst." Daniel thanked him, hung up, and stared at his checking account balance on his phone screen. The number stared back, accusingly. He'd budgeted for repairs, but not this many this quickly. The house was bleeding money faster than he could earn it, and the Riverside Plaza project, while promising, wouldn't pay until completion. He could call his parents. They'd offer to help, the way they always did, with that careful concern that made him feel like a failure. Or he could figure it out himself, like he'd been doing since Claire died, since he'd made the decision to leave Chicago, since he'd chosen independence over security. The afternoon crawled by. At 3, Daniel changed into slightly nicer clothes, a button-down shirt that didn't have paint on it, jeans without holes, and headed to Emma's school. Little Oaks Academy occupied a converted historic building on the edge of Charleston's downtown, all brick and ivy and the kind of charm that came with a tuition rate that made Daniel wince every month. But Emma loved it, and her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was the kind of educator who actually seemed to care about the children as humans rather than just test scores. "Mr. Mercer, come in." Mrs. Patterson welcomed him into her classroom, which was decorated with children's artwork and smelled like crayons and hope. "Thank you for making time." They sat in chairs designed for people much smaller than Daniel, and Mrs. Patterson pulled out Emma's folder. "Emma is doing wonderfully," she began, and Daniel felt his shoulders relax slightly. "She's creative, engaged, makes friends easily. The transition from Chicago seems to have gone smoothly." "That's good to hear. She's been pretty resilient." "Children often are, more than we give them credit for." Mrs. Patterson paused. "There is one small thing I wanted to mention, nothing concerning, just something to be aware of." Daniel's shoulders tensed again. "Okay." "Emma talks about her mother sometimes, which is completely normal and healthy. But last week, during free drawing time, she drew a picture of your family." Mrs. Patterson pulled out a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. "That's you, that's her, and that's her mom," Daniel finished quietly. In Emma's 4-year-old artistic vision, Claire was a figure with yellow hair and a big smile, standing next to a small house that looked suspiciously like their new place on Birchwood Lane. "She told me her mommy lives in the stars now, but sometimes visits in dreams," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "I just wanted you to know, in case you're navigating any grief-related conversations at home." Daniel looked at the drawing, at his daughter's attempt to make sense of a world where mothers could be there and then suddenly not be there, where houses could change but families could still exist somehow. "We talk about it," he said, "as much as a 4-year-old can process. Some days are harder than others." "You're doing a great job, Mr. Mercer. Really. Emma's a happy, well-adjusted child. That speaks volumes about the home you're providing." He left the school 20 minutes later with Emma's drawing carefully folded in his jacket pocket and a lump in his throat that wouldn't quite go away. The afternoon sun was starting to slant toward evening, painting Charleston in those golden tones that made even run-down neighborhoods look picturesque. He picked Emma up at 5:30, listened to her chatter about how she'd played princesses at recess and learned about butterflies and science, and took her home to their half-finished house where dinner would be something quick because he still had 3 hours of work to do after she went to bed. But when they pulled into the driveway, there was someone sitting on his porch steps. Victoria Hale, still in work clothes, a navy suit this time, with her dark hair slightly mussed and her expensive heels kicked off beside her, sitting barefoot on his concrete steps like it was the most natural thing in the world. "That's the lady from the big house," Emma announced, unbuckling her seatbelt with the speed of someone who'd spotted something interesting. Daniel parked and got out, confused. "Victoria?" She looked up, and he saw it again, that bone-deep tiredness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with carrying too much for too long. "I'm sorry," she said, standing up quickly, grabbing her shoes. "I didn't mean to. I was just—" She stopped, seemed to gather herself. "I had a terrible day, and I was walking, and I ended up here. I should go." "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, because she clearly wasn't. "I'm fine, just boardroom politics. Nothing that matters." But her hands were shaking slightly as she tried to slip her shoes back on, and Daniel made a decision. "Have you eaten?" Victoria looked up, surprised. "What?" "Dinner. Have you eaten? Because I'm about to make possibly the world's most mediocre spaghetti, and Emma here could talk the ear off a statue, but you're welcome to join us if you want." Emma had already made the decision for all of them. "You should stay. Daddy makes really good spaghetti. He's lying about it being mediocre." Victoria looked between Daniel and Emma, and something in her expression cracked, just slightly. "I would like that. If you're sure." "I'm sure. Come on." They went inside, and Daniel was suddenly acutely aware of how his house looked through someone else's eyes. Boxes still unpacked, furniture that didn't quite match, walls that needed paint, the general chaos of a life still being assembled. But Victoria didn't seem to notice or care. She took off her suit jacket, rolled up her sleeves, and asked where she could wash her hands. Emma appointed herself tour guide, dragging Victoria through the house and explaining in elaborate detail the location of every important thing, where Mr. Hoppy slept, where Daddy kept the good cookies, on top of the fridge where Emma couldn't reach, where the bathroom was, but the door sticks so you have to push really hard. Daniel started water boiling and pulled out the ingredients for sauce, listening to Emma's running commentary and Victoria's surprisingly engaged responses. Not the kind of polite, distant responses adults usually gave children, but actual conversation. "What do you do in the big house?" Emma asked as they returned to the kitchen. "I work a lot," Victoria said. "Too much, probably." "What's your job?" "I run a company that makes technology, computer programs mostly. Like games?" "Some games, yes, but mostly programs that help businesses work better." Emma considered this. "That sounds boring." Victoria laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her. "Sometimes it is. Very boring." Dinner was exactly as advertised. Decent spaghetti, nothing fancy, eaten at a kitchen table that wobbled slightly because Daniel hadn't gotten around to fixing it yet. But Emma kept up a steady stream of conversation, and Victoria responded with a kind of attention that made Daniel realize how rare it was to see someone actually listen to a child. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Victoria her room, currently a mattress on the floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes of toys, and her favorite stuffed animals, and her collection of rocks from the backyard that were very special and probably magical. Daniel cleaned up the kitchen, listening to their voices from down the hall, and wondered what kind of day could drive a billionaire CEO to sit on a stranger's porch steps looking lost. By the time Victoria emerged, Emma had extracted a promise that she would come back and see the finished house when it's all pretty. "I should go," Victoria said, but she didn't move toward the door immediately. "Thank you. For dinner. For—" she gestured vaguely. "This." "Any time," Daniel said, and meant it. They stood in the doorway, the evening air drifting in, carrying the scent of magnolia and the distant sounds of Charleston settling into night. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Sure." "That terrible day you mentioned. Are you actually okay?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, her expression flickering between the polished composure and something more honest. "No," she said finally, "but I will be. I always am." "That's not the same as being okay." "No," she agreed. "It's not." She left shortly after, walking back across the lawn to her estate, and Daniel watched until she disappeared through her gates before closing his door. Emma was already in her pajamas, demanding a story, and Daniel read to her from the worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are that had been Claire's favorite, doing all the voices until Emma giggled and told him he was being silly. After she fell asleep, Daniel returned to the kitchen and his laptop, trying to focus on the Riverside Plaza designs. But his mind kept drifting to a woman in a navy suit sitting on concrete steps because she had nowhere else to go. The next few days fell into routine. Work, Emma, repairs, repeat. Mike and his crew tore into the waterline replacement with the kind of enthusiasm that usually preceded a significant increase in the final bill. The Riverside Plaza project consumed Daniel's mornings and late nights. Emma adapted to her new school with the ease of childhood. And Victoria didn't come back. Daniel told himself it didn't matter. She'd had a bad day, sought refuge in the nearest available place, and now she was back to her regular life of running a tech empire and doing whatever billionaires did with their time. It made sense. Their worlds had intersected for exactly one evening, and that was fine. But on Friday afternoon, as Daniel was reviewing structural calculations and trying not to think about his dwindling bank account, there was a knock on the door. Victoria stood on his porch, newly repaired by Mike that morning, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking slightly uncertain. "I come bearing caffeine," she said, "as an apology for ambushing you on Monday." "You didn't ambush. You sat on the steps." "I invaded your space without warning. The space was a porch, a public-facing porch." Daniel opened the door wider. "Emma's at school for another hour if you want to come in." She did, handing him one of the coffees. It was from Harlow's, a local place that charged obscene amounts for coffee that was admittedly exceptional. They sat on the porch in the Carolina afternoon that was trying to decide between autumn and summer, and didn't talk for a few minutes, just drank expensive coffee and existed in the same space. "I wanted to explain," Victoria said finally, "about Monday. You don't owe me an explanation." "I know, but I want to give you one anyway." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "My company is going through a difficult transition. We're being pushed to merge with a competitor, and the board thinks it's the smart move, and my father, who founded the company, agrees with them, and I don't." "What do you think should happen?" "I think we should stay independent. I think we're stronger alone, but everyone else sees dollar signs and market share and quarterly reports, and I'm apparently being emotional and short-sighted." She said the last part with particular bitterness. "Are you? Being emotional?" "Probably, but I'm also right." She looked at him. "You left a successful career to go independent. Do you regret it?" Daniel thought about Chicago, about the corner office, about Claire in the hospital saying she wanted him to be happy, to build things that mattered. "No, it's harder, it's scarier, but it's mine." "Exactly." Victoria smiled, small and tight. "That's what Monday was. Reality catching up with what I want versus what everyone expects me to do. I was supposed to have dinner with Adrian Cole, the CEO of the company we're meant to merge with, and I couldn't. I just walked instead." "Walked all the way to my porch?" "Apparently." She laughed. "Not my finest moment." "I don't know. Seemed pretty fine to me." Emma's still talking about how the lady from the big house liked her rock collection. Those were exceptional rocks. They fell into conversation the way some people did, easily, without the usual social friction. Victoria asked about his work, actually listened to the answer, understood the difference between designing something beautiful and designing something functional, and the endless challenge of doing both. Daniel asked about her company, and she explained it in terms that didn't assume he was an idiot, talking about the technology they developed for logistics and supply chain management like it was architecture for invisible systems. An hour passed. Then another. Emma's school pickup time approached, and Daniel mentioned it reluctantly. "I should let you go," Victoria said, standing. "You could come with me, if you want." Emma would be thrilled. She hesitated, and Daniel could see the internal calculation. The CEO weighing the cost of being seen at an elementary school pickup with the single father next door. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." They picked up Emma together, and if any of the other parents found it odd that Victoria Hale, recognizable from business magazines and local news, was casually chatting with Daniel Mercer. They didn't show it. Or maybe they did show it, and Daniel was too focused on Emma's delighted explanation of her day to notice. That evening set a pattern. Victoria started stopping by more often, sometimes announced, sometimes not. Sometimes she brought coffee or takeout from restaurants Daniel couldn't afford. Sometimes she just showed up and sat on the porch while Daniel worked and Emma played. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about the pressure from her father, Harrison Hale, who'd built Hale Technologies from nothing and couldn't understand why his daughter wouldn't just do the sensible thing and merge with Cole Enterprises. Daniel told her about Claire, about how grief came in waves that followed no predictable schedule, about learning to be enough parent for a child who deserved two. She never talked down to Emma, never treated her like a prop or an obstacle. She learned the names of all the stuffed animals, remembered which rocks were the special ones, and had opinions about which princess was objectively the best. Belle, for the record, because she values intelligence and personal growth. The neighborhood noticed, of course. Patricia stopped by with another casserole and questions that weren't quite questions. Gerald mentioned that it was nice to see Victoria taking an interest in community, whatever that meant. But Daniel didn't care what the neighborhood thought. For the first time since Claire died, since the move, since the decision to rebuild his entire life, he felt like he was connecting with another adult who understood what it meant to choose the hard right thing over the easy wrong thing. 3 weeks after that first knock on his door, Victoria showed up on a Wednesday evening looking particularly worn down. Board meeting? Daniel guessed. Board meeting, she confirmed, sinking onto the porch steps. Emma was already asleep inside, and the October night had finally committed to being actually cool. How bad? They're setting a timeline, 6 months to agree to the merger, or they'll call for my replacement as CEO. Daniel sat beside her. Can they do that? Legally? It's complicated. My father's shares plus the board majority could make it happen. Would they? That's the question I've been asking myself for 3 hours. What does your gut say? That I'm about to find out who actually supports me versus who just likes the idea of me. She leaned back against the railing. Adrian called me today. Personally. Something in Daniel's chest tightened at the way she said the name. What did he want? To convince me that this merger is good for everyone, that we could build something bigger together, that he respects my vision and wants me to lead the combined company. She paused. He was very smooth about it. But you don't believe him. I don't know what I believe anymore. Maybe everyone's right, and I'm just being stubborn. Maybe I'm holding on to independence because I'm scared of what happens when I'm not in complete control. Daniel thought about his own leap, leaving the security of Morrison's firm, taking the risk on himself. Or maybe you built something that matters, and you don't want to watch it get absorbed into someone else's vision. Victoria looked at him, and in the porch light, she looked younger than her years and older at the same time. How do you know when you're being brave versus when you're just being foolish? I think brave and foolish look pretty similar from the outside. The difference is on the inside. And on the inside? You already know what you want to do. The question is whether you're willing to pay the cost. She was quiet for a long time, and Daniel let the silence sit between them. Cars passed on the street. Somewhere a dog barked. The ordinary sounds of a neighborhood at night. I invited him to dinner, Victoria said finally. Adrian? My father insisted. Said it would be good to have a personal conversation, just the three of us. Next Friday at my place. She turned to look at Daniel. I'm terrified. Of dinner? Of what it represents. Like I'm already giving in just by agreeing to sit at the same table. You're not giving in. You're gathering information. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. Giving in would be saying yes before you walk into the room. You haven't done that. She smiled, small and grateful. When did you become so wise about corporate politics? I'm not wise. I'm just good at justifying my own questionable decisions. He stood, offered her his hand. Come on. I'll make you some actually terrible tea, and you can tell me what you're really afraid of. She took his hand, let him pull her up. What makes you think there's more? Because I know what it looks like when someone's afraid of losing what they built. And I know what it looks like when they're afraid of something else entirely. They went inside, and Daniel made tea that was indeed terrible because he'd bought the cheapest brand at the grocery store. Victoria sat at his wobbling kitchen table and told him what she was really afraid of, not losing her company, but losing herself in the process of keeping it, becoming the person everyone expected instead of the person she actually was. My whole life has been about expectations, she said, wrapping her hands around the mug. Right schools, right degrees, right career path. Even taking over Hale Technologies wasn't really a choice. It was what you did when you were Harrison Hale's daughter, and I've been good at it. Better than good, actually. But somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing what I wanted versus what I was supposed to want. What do you want? Daniel asked. I don't know. That's the terrifying part. She looked around his kitchen at the boxes still unpacked, the walls still unpainted, the life still in progress. But when I'm here, I feel like I can at least ask the question. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt since Claire, since before everything fell apart. Not just attraction, though there was that too, obvious and undeniable, but recognition. The sense of finding someone who understood the specific loneliness of building a life that didn't match the template. You can always ask the question here, he said quietly. Victoria met his eyes and the air in the kitchen changed, became charged with possibility and risk and all the complicated things that happened when two people realized they were standing at the edge of something that could matter. Emma's voice called from her room, "Daddy, I need water!" And the moment broke. "I should go," Victoria said, but she didn't move. "Probably," Daniel agreed, but he didn't move either. Finally, she stood. "Thank you. For the terrible tea and the better conversation." "Any time." At the door she paused. "Daniel, whatever happens with all this, the merger, the board, everything, I'm glad you moved to Birchwood Lane." "Me too." She walked back across the lawn, and Daniel watched her go before checking on Emma, who'd fallen back asleep before he even got there, and returning to his kitchen table. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. "That really was terrible tea." He smiled and typed back, "I warned you, you did. Next time I'm bringing the good stuff. Next time." I like the sound of that. There was a pause, then, "Me too." Daniel sat in his unfinished kitchen, in his half-renovated house, with his daughter sleeping down the hall and a text message glowing on his phone, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The good stuff arrived 3 days later in the form of a sleek black bag from a tea shop Daniel didn't even know existed in Charleston. Victoria appeared on his porch Saturday morning with it tucked under one arm and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept well. "You look terrible," Daniel said, opening the door. "Good morning to you too," she replied, but there was no real bite in it. "Can I come in, or are you going to make me drink premium tea on your porch like some kind of beverage outcast?" Emma came running from the living room, still in her pajamas, her hair a wild mess that defied all attempts at management. "Victoria, did you bring the good cookies too?" "Emma," Daniel warned, but Victoria was already laughing. "As a matter of fact, I did." She produced a white bakery box from the bag. "Chocolate croissants from Delacroix. Don't tell your father I'm corrupting you with French pastries before 9 a.m. "I'm standing right here," Daniel pointed out. "Then you can have one too." They settled in the kitchen, which Daniel had finally gotten around to painting last week. The walls were now a soft gray that Emma had declared boring but okay, and the table no longer wobbled thanks to a strategically placed piece of cardboard under one leg. Progress? In its own small way. Victoria moved around his kitchen like she'd been there 100 times, finding mugs without asking, boiling water, setting out the croissants on actual plates instead of eating them from the box like Daniel would have done. She was dressed casually today, jeans, a cream sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. It was jarring to see her like this, without the armor of business suits and controlled professionalism. "So what's the crisis this time?" Daniel asked, once Emma had taken her croissant to the living room to watch cartoons. "What makes you think there's a crisis? You're here at 8:30 on a Saturday morning with fancy tea and pastries. Either there's a crisis or you've decided to adopt us, and I'm pretty sure it's not the latter." Victoria poured hot water over tea leaves, watching them unfurl in the strainer with more attention than the process probably deserved. "My father called last night. Adrian moved the dinner to tonight. Apparently he has some urgent business trip next week and wanted to discuss the merger before he leaves." "That's sudden. That's strategy. He's pushing, trying to catch me off balance. She handed Daniel a cup of tea that smelled like flowers and something earthy he couldn't identify. And it's working. Daniel sipped the tea. It was remarkable, complex in a way that made his terrible grocery store brand seem like colored water. You don't have to go? Yes, I do. If I cancel, they'll say I'm avoiding the conversation, that I'm not taking the merger seriously. Are you taking it seriously? I'm taking it seriously enough to be terrified of saying the wrong thing and losing everything I've built. She sat across from him, cradling her own mug. Adrian's smart, Daniel. He knows exactly how to make bad ideas sound reasonable. And my father trusts him, which means I'm walking into a 2-against-1 situation in my own house. Then don't let it be 2-against-1. Bring someone. Victoria looked up. What? Bring someone who's on your side. A buffer. Someone who can remind you what you actually think when they start tag-teaming you with corporate logic. I can't bring my CFO to a personal dinner. That would look... I wasn't suggesting your CFO. The implication hung in the air between them. Victoria stared at him, something shifting in her expression. You can't be serious. Why not? I clean up okay. I can use the right fork. And I'm very good at reminding people what they actually want when everyone else is telling them what they should want. Daniel, this is a dinner with my father and a billionaire CEO. You're, not in your tax bracket. I'm aware. He set down his mug. But I'm also someone who has absolutely nothing to gain from this merger, which means I'm the only person at that table who won't have an agenda. Except supporting me. That's not an agenda. That's just common sense. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. From the living room came the sounds of Emma's cartoon, bright and cheerful, and completely disconnected from the weight of the conversation happening in the kitchen. It would cause questions, Victoria said finally. My father would want to know who you are, why you're there. Adrian would read into it. Let them. You said yourself you're tired of living your life based on what everyone expects. This is your house, your dinner, your decision. If you want backup, bring backup. Just like that? Just like that. She looked at him with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude, or something more complicated that involved the recognition that they'd crossed some invisible line from neighbors to something else entirely. Okay, she said, but if this goes terribly wrong, I'm blaming you. Fair enough? Emma wandered back into the kitchen, chocolate on her face, announcing that she was still hungry and could she have another croissant? And also could Victoria please stay for lunch because Daddy was going to make grilled cheese and his grilled cheese was the best in the whole world probably. I don't know about the whole world, Daniel said, but I do make a decent grilled cheese, Victoria stayed. They spent the afternoon in the kind of easy domesticity that felt both natural and surreal. Daniel cooking while Victoria and Emma built an elaborate fort in the living room out of couch cushions and blankets. At some point, Victoria's phone rang at least a dozen times, and she ignored every single call, choosing instead to hold up blankets while Emma directed fort construction with the authority of a tiny general. Later, after lunch, Emma fell asleep in the fort she'd insisted was too good to take down, and Victoria helped Daniel carry her to her actual bed. She's wonderful, Victoria said quietly as they stood in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep with Mr. Hoppy clutched in her arms. She is, though I'm biased. You're allowed to be. Victoria turned to look at him, and in the soft afternoon light filtering through Emma's window, she looked more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. Thank you for today, for offering to come tonight, for... She gestured vaguely. All of this. You don't have to thank me for lunch and fort building. I'm not thanking you for lunch. I'm thanking you for treating me like a person instead of a portfolio. Before Daniel could respond, she'd already stepped back, moving toward the hallway. I should go. Get ready for tonight. The reservation's at 7. What's the dress code? Expensive. She smiled. But not too expensive. My father hates ostentation even though he lives in it. That makes no sense. Welcome to Harrison Hale's worldview. Nothing makes sense, but everything has rules. Daniel walked her to the door, and on the porch, the repaired porch that no longer threatened to collapse, she paused. 6:30? She asked. I'll send a car. I can drive myself. Daniel, my driveway is half a mile long and has a gate. Just let me send the car. Fine, but I'm wearing my own suit, not borrowing one from your security team. I wouldn't dream of it. She started down the steps, then turned back. And Daniel? Whatever happens tonight, I'm glad you'll be there." She left before he could answer, and Daniel went back inside to his sleeping daughter and his half-finished house, and the sudden realization that he'd just agreed to have dinner with people who existed in a completely different stratosphere of wealth and influence. He called his sister Maya because if he was going to make a potentially terrible decision, he at least wanted someone to tell him how terrible it was. "Let me get this straight," Maya said after he'd explained the situation. "You're going to have dinner with a billionaire and her billionaire father to discuss a corporate merger you know nothing about." "When you say it like that, it sounds bad." "That's because it is bad, Danny. What are you doing?" "Helping a friend. A friend you've known for less than a month. A friend who happens to be my neighbor. A friend who happens to be one of the richest women in the Southeast." Maya's voice took on that particular tone that meant she was about to say something he wouldn't like. "Are you sure this is about helping her and not about—" "Don't. The fact that you haven't shown interest in anyone since Claire died, and now suddenly—" "Maya, I mean it. Don't." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Maya spoke again, her voice was gentler. "I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying be careful. You've got Emma to think about, and yourself. Getting involved with someone like Victoria Hale, that's complicated even before you factor in dead wives and billion-dollar companies." "I'm not getting involved. I'm attending a dinner." "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." After he hung up, Daniel stood in his kitchen and wondered if Maya was right. If this was about helping Victoria, or about the way his chest tightened when she smiled, the way the house felt less empty when she was in it, the way Emma lit up whenever Victoria appeared. But Emma was asleep, and he had 4 hours to find his one decent suit and remember how to tie a tie. And there was no point in questioning decisions he'd already made. The car arrived at 6:30 exactly, a sleek black sedan driven by a man who introduced himself as Robert, and treated Daniel with the kind of professional courtesy that suggested he'd driven far more important people than a single-father architect from Birchwood Lane. Victoria's estate looked different at night. The gates opened smoothly, revealing a driveway lined with subtle landscape lighting that turned the path into something out of a magazine spread. The house itself, mansion, really, Daniel couldn't pretend otherwise, was a masterwork of historic preservation and modern luxury. White columns, wide verandas, windows glowing warm against the evening dark. Robert pulled up to the front entrance, and before Daniel could even open his door, Victoria appeared. She'd transformed back into the version of herself he'd seen that first night, elegant, polished, every inch the CEO. A black dress that probably cost more than Daniel's car, hair swept up, jewelry that caught the light. But when she saw him, her expression softened into something real. "You came," she said. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might come to your senses. I left those behind around the time I bought a house held together by hope and contractor's tape." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" She took it, and together they walked into the house that felt more like a museum than a home. High ceilings, art that was definitely original, furniture that looked like it belonged behind velvet ropes. But Victoria led him through it all like it was completely normal, past rooms Daniel barely had time to register, to a dining room that somehow managed to be both grand and intimate. Two men stood as they entered. The first was older, early 70s maybe, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of being the most important person in any room. Harrison Hale, obviously. The second was younger, mid-40s, handsome in that calculated way of men who'd learned to use their appearance as an asset. Tailored suit, expensive watch, smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Father, Adrian, this is Daniel Mercer," Victoria said, her voice smooth and professional. "Daniel, my father, Harrison Hale, and Adrian Cole." Harrison's handshake was firm, assessing. "Mercer. Victoria mentioned she'd invited a friend. I wasn't aware she had any friends I hadn't met." "I keep some things private," Victoria replied coolly. Adrian's handshake was equally firm, but somehow less genuine. "Daniel, what do you do?" "I'm an architect, independent practice." "Interesting. What kind of architecture?" "Small commercial, some residential, currently working on a retail development." "How modest," Adrian said, and it wasn't quite an insult, but it wasn't quite not one either. They sat for dinner, Daniel beside Victoria, Harrison at the head of the table, Adrian across from them, and a woman in a black uniform began serving the first course. The food was exquisite. The wine probably cost more than Daniel's mortgage, and the conversation started with careful pleasantries that everyone knew were just prelude to the real discussion. "So Daniel," Harrison said as they finished the first course, "how did you meet my daughter?" "I moved in next door about a month ago. She returned a flashlight my contractor left in her yard." "And you've been friends since?" Adrian asked, something pointed in his tone. "We've gotten to know each other, yes." "How convenient," Adrian continued, "given the timing of Victoria's reluctance regarding our merger discussions." Victoria's hand tightened on her wine glass. "Adrian, I'm simply noting the coincidence," he said smoothly. "You've been resistant to this merger for months, and now suddenly you have a new friend who presumably supports that resistance." "Daniel has nothing to do with my business decisions," Victoria said. "Doesn't he?" Harrison interjected. "You've brought him to a dinner specifically about those decisions. That suggests otherwise." Daniel had been in enough difficult rooms to know when to speak and when to let silence do the work. But he also knew when someone needed backup, and Victoria's posture had gone rigid in the way that meant she was fighting to maintain composure. "I'm here because Victoria invited me," Daniel said calmly. "Not to influence her business decisions, but to have dinner. If that makes you uncomfortable, I'm happy to leave." "No one's asking you to leave," Harrison said, but his eyes were calculating. "I'm simply trying to understand who you are and why you're in my daughter's life. I'm someone who moved to Charleston to start over after my wife died. I bought the house next to Victoria's. We became friends. That's the entire story." The mention of Claire created a brief pause, the kind that came when death entered a conversation uninvited. Harrison's expression shifted slightly, not quite sympathy, but at least recognition of grief. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and it sounded genuine. "Thank you." Adrian, sensing the shift in tone, redirected. "Victoria, your father and I were discussing the merger timeline before you arrived. The board has set a deadline of 6 months, but I'd like to propose we accelerate." "Accelerate?" Victoria's voice was carefully neutral. "Move the target to 3 months. It gives us a tighter window to negotiate terms, which benefits both sides. Quick decision, clean transition. Or it pressures me into agreeing before I'm ready." "You've had months to be ready," Harrison said. "At some point, readiness becomes delay." Victoria set down her fork with deliberate care. "I'm not delaying. I'm being thorough." "You're being stubborn," her father replied. "This merger makes sense on every level. Financial, strategic, operational. Adrian's company complements ours perfectly. The combined entity would dominate the market." "And I would be COO of the combined company," Victoria said. "Not CEO." "Shared leadership," Adrian corrected. "Co-CEOs for the first 2 years, then a transition based on performance and board approval. Which means you become CEO and I become your second." "That's not predetermined." "It's exactly predetermined, Adrian. You know it, I know it, and the board knows it. This isn't a merger of equals. It's an acquisition dressed up with prettier language." The tension in the room had shifted from uncomfortable to hostile. Daniel watched Victoria's father and Adrian exchange a look, some silent communication that confirmed everything she'd just said. "Victoria," Harrison began, his voice taking on a paternal tone that Daniel suspected had ended many arguments. "I built Hale Technologies for you. Everything I've done has been to secure your future. This merger does that." "It secures the company's future," Victoria countered. "That's not the same as securing mine." "They're inseparable." "Are they? Because it seems to me you're more interested in the company's legacy than in what I actually want." "What you want," Harrison said, his voice hardening, "is to maintain control at the expense of smart growth. Pride, Victoria. That's what this is. It's not pride to want autonomy over the company I've been running successfully for 5 years. Successfully, but not optimally. Our market share has plateaued. Our growth rate is declining. The board sees these numbers. The board sees quarterly reports. I see the bigger picture." "Then explain it to me," Harrison said. "Explain how refusing this merger serves anyone except your ego." Daniel felt Victoria tense beside him, saw her jaw tighten in the way that meant she was close to saying something she'd regret. He'd promised to be backup, to remind her what she wanted when everyone else was telling her what she should want. "Can I ask a question?" Daniel said into the charged silence. All three of them turned to look at him like they'd forgotten he was there. What is it? Harrison asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. When Victoria took over as CEO, what was the company worth? Harrison frowned. About $800 million. And now? $2.3 billion, Adrian supplied. But that growth rate is slowing, so she nearly tripled the company's value in 5 years, Daniel continued. That seems like pretty optimal performance to me. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results, Harrison said. No, but it does suggest she knows what she's doing. Daniel looked at Adrian. What's your company worth? $1.8 billion? And how long have you been CEO? 7 years. So in 7 years, you've grown your company to a value that's less than what Victoria achieved in 5 years. And somehow the narrative is that she needs you to optimize her performance? Adrian's expression went cold. The markets we operate in are different. Are they? You're both in tech logistics, similar markets, similar challenges. The difference is she's outperformed you per year of tenure, and now you want to merge so you can, what, learn from her strategies or absorb her success into your company and take credit for it? Daniel, Victoria said quietly, but there was something in her voice that wasn't quite warning. That's an oversimplification, Adrian said tightly. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a successful woman being told she needs a man to validate her achievements. That's not what this is about, Harrison snapped. This is about strategic growth. This is about control, Daniel interrupted, and the room went silent. Victoria's been running this company her way, successfully, and you don't like that she won't follow the playbook you wrote. So you're packaging this merger as smart business when really it's about making her conform to your expectations. Harrison stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You've been in my daughter's life for what, a month? And you think you understand our family dynamics, our business strategy. I understand when someone's being pressured to give up something they built because it makes other people uncomfortable. Daniel remained seated, kept his voice level. And I understand that sometimes the people who say they want what's best for you actually want what's easiest for them. This conversation is over, Harrison said. Victoria, I'll speak to you tomorrow when you've had time to reconsider bringing your... He looked at Daniel with barely concealed disdain. Friend-to-business discussions. He left the dining room, and after a moment, Adrian followed, pausing only to say to Victoria, think about what you're risking. Think about what you stand to lose. Then they were alone, and the silence in the massive dining room felt enormous. Well, Victoria said finally, that went exactly as terribly as I thought it would. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... You were perfect. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with something between tears and laughter. Absolutely perfect. Did you see my father's face when you called him out on the control thing? I saw it. I also saw him storm out of his own daughter's house. He does that. He'll be fine tomorrow, or at least civil. She stood, suddenly restless. Come on, I can't sit in this room anymore. She led him through the house, past more rooms filled with expensive things that meant nothing, out onto a veranda that overlooked gardens lit by carefully placed lights. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of late-blooming flowers and the distant sound of the city. I told you it would cause questions, Victoria said, leaning against the railing. You did warn me, but you came anyway. I did. She turned to face him, and in the soft garden lights, she looked more real than she had all evening. Why? Because you asked. Because you needed someone who wasn't invested in the outcome. Because... He stopped, weighing his next words carefully. Because when someone I care about is walking into a fight, I'd rather be there than not. Someone you care about, she repeated softly. Yes. Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying him with an intensity that made Daniel acutely aware of how alone they were, how close they were standing, how the evening had shifted into something neither of them had quite planned for. I'm going to refuse the merger, she said finally, whatever it costs me. I know. They might remove me as CEO. They might. I could lose everything. You could, but you'd still have what matters, which is the knowledge that you didn't let anyone else write your story. She smiled, small and fierce. When did you become a philosopher? Around the time I started having dinner with billionaires who pretend they're not terrified. I'm not terrified. Liar. Okay, I'm terrified. But I'm also... She paused, searching for words. I'm also more certain than I've been in months. And that's because of you. Before Daniel could process what was happening, she'd closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was brief, tentative, the kind of kiss that asked a question more than it made a statement. When she pulled back, her expression was uncertain. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have... Daniel kissed her back, longer this time, one hand coming up to cup her face, and whatever she'd been about to say dissolved into the warm Carolina night. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Victoria laughed. A real laugh, bright and surprised and completely unguarded. Well, she said, that's new. Is it a good new or a complicated new? Both, definitely both. She took his hand, laced their fingers together. Daniel, I'm a mess. My life is a mess. The next few months are going to be a corporate nightmare, and I have no idea what's going to happen with the company or my father or any of it. I know. And you're okay with that? I'm a single father living in a half-renovated house trying to build a career from scratch while raising a 4-year-old who thinks vegetables are a punishment. My life isn't exactly simple either. So we're both disasters. Pretty much. And you think this is a good idea? Daniel thought about Claire, about the promise he'd made to himself after she died. To live honestly, to choose what mattered over what was easy, to build a life that meant something even if it was harder. I think, he said carefully, that the good ideas are usually the ones that scare you a little, and I think you're worth being scared for. Victoria kissed him again, softer this time, and Daniel let himself fall into it, into the impossibility and the rightness and the terrifying knowledge that his carefully reconstructed life had just gotten infinitely more complicated. Somewhere in the house, a phone rang. Victoria ignored it. I should probably go, Daniel said eventually. Emma's with Patricia tonight, and I promised I'd be back by 10. Patricia from the Casseroles? The very same. She's already suspicious about where I am tonight. Let her be suspicious. But Victoria stepped back, her hand still in his. Thank you for coming, for being here, for... She gestured between them. All of this. I didn't do anything except tell your father he was wrong. You did more than that. You reminded me why I'm fighting. Robert drove Daniel home through the quiet Charleston streets, and Daniel sat in the back of the expensive car and tried to process everything that had happened in the space of one evening. He'd gone to dinner planning to be supportive. He'd ended up confronting a billionaire and kissing another one, and somehow both of those things felt exactly right and completely insane. Patricia was waiting on his porch when Robert dropped him off, her expression somewhere between concerned and nosy. Fancy car, she observed. Friend of a friend, Daniel said vaguely. Uh-huh. Emma's asleep in your guest room. She was an angel, as always. Thank you for watching her. Patricia gave him a long look. You're getting involved with Victoria Hale, aren't you? Daniel considered lying, decided there was no point. Maybe. She's a good woman, smart, accomplished. But that world she lives in, Daniel, it's not kind to outsiders. I'm starting to notice that. Just be careful, for your sake and Emma's. After Patricia left, Daniel checked on Emma, still asleep, peaceful, and then stood in his kitchen and looked at his phone. A text from Victoria. Thank you for tonight, for everything. He typed back, worth every awkward moment, even my father's death glare, especially that. Very intimidating. I was terrified. Liar. You were magnificent. Daniel smiled and set down his phone. Tomorrow, he'd have to deal with the fallout, with questions from Patricia and probably half the neighborhood, with the reality of what getting involved with Victoria Hale actually meant. But tonight, standing in his unfinished kitchen with his daughter sleeping safely down the hall, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Like maybe the future wasn't just something to survive, but something to actually look forward to. The fallout arrived faster than Daniel expected, delivered in the form of Harrison Hale himself, appearing on his porch at 7:30 the following morning. Daniel answered the door in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, coffee cup in hand, completely unprepared for the sight of one of Charleston's wealthiest men standing on his half-finished porch, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Hale, Daniel said, because what else could he say? May I come in? Harrison's tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. Daniel stepped aside, acutely aware that his kitchen still had unpacked boxes in the corner and Emma's drawings covered half the refrigerator. Harrison entered like he was touring a curiosity exhibit, taking in the modest space with an expression that revealed nothing. Emma's still asleep, Daniel said quietly. Can we talk on the porch? They went back outside, settling into the chairs Daniel had finally gotten around to buying last week. The morning was cool, autumn finally asserting itself, and the street was quiet except for the distant sound of someone's sprinkler system. I'm going to be direct, Harrison said without preamble. What are your intentions with my daughter? Daniel had expected anger, maybe threats, not this oddly formal concern that sounded like something from a different century. I'm not sure I understand the question. Yes, you do. Victoria's worth billions of dollars. She's the CEO of a major technology company. She's also emotionally vulnerable right now, caught between family expectations and her own stubborn pride. So I'm asking, what do you want from her? Nothing. Harrison's laugh was sharp and humorless. Everyone wants something, Mr. Mercer. Money, status, access. Men have pursued my daughter for those things her entire adult life. You expect me to believe you're different? I expect you to believe what you see. I didn't pursue Victoria. She knocked on my door returning a flashlight. Everything that's happened since then has been two people getting to know each other. Two people from completely different worlds. Different tax brackets, Daniel corrected. Not different world. We're both human beings trying to figure out how to live lives that matter. The number of zeros in her bank account doesn't change that. Harrison studied him with the kind of attention that probably made board members squirm. You confronted me in my daughter's home last night, questioned my business acumen, my motives. That takes either courage or stupidity. Maybe both. What makes you think you know what's best for Victoria's company? You're an architect. Small commercial projects, you said. What do you know about corporate mergers and strategic growth? Nothing, Daniel admitted. But I know when someone's being pressured to give up something they love. And I know that every successful person I've ever met, and I worked with plenty in Chicago, the ones who actually built something meaningful were the ones who trusted their instincts over other people's advice. Instincts don't pay shareholders. No, but Victoria's instincts have tripled your company's value in 5 years. That seems to be paying shareholders just fine. Harrison's jaw tightened. You don't understand the complexities involved, the board dynamics, the market pressures, the strategic positioning required to compete at this level. You're right, I don't. But I understand that Victoria is terrified of losing herself in the process of keeping everyone else happy. And I understand that's a terrible way to live. And you're going to save her from that? Harrison's voice dripped skepticism. A single father in a house that's falling apart, trying to build a career from scratch? What exactly do you offer my daughter that she can't have 1,000 times over? The question landed like a punch because it was the same one Daniel had been asking himself since last night. What did he offer someone like Victoria? His house was a disaster. His bank account was barely stable. His life was a constant juggling act between Emma's needs and work deadlines and basic survival. But before he could spiral into self-doubt, Emma's voice called from inside. Daddy, I'm hungry. Be right there, sweetheart, Daniel called back, then turned to Harrison. I offer her honesty. I offer her a place where she doesn't have to perform or prove anything. I offer her what I'd want if our situations were reversed, someone who sees her instead of her stock price. Harrison stood abruptly. My daughter is making a mistake with this merger refusal. An expensive, potentially career-ending mistake, and now she's making another mistake with you. I can't stop either one, but I can make sure you understand what you're walking into. Which is? A battle. The board won't accept her decision quietly. Adrian won't give up easily. There will be pressure, public and private, to force her hand. And if you're standing beside her when that happens, you'll be caught in the crossfire. Harrison moved toward the steps. Think about whether you're prepared for that. Think about whether Emma deserves to be caught in it too. He left without waiting for a response, and Daniel stood on his porch watching Charleston wake up around him, Harrison's warning echoing in his head. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, dragging Mr. Hoppy by one ear. Who was that man? Victoria's father. Did he come for breakfast? We don't have any croissants. Daniel picked her up, settling her on his hip, even though she was getting too big for it. No, he just came to talk. Come on, let's make pancakes. They spent the morning in the comfortable chaos of weekend routines, pancakes with too much syrup, cartoons, Emma's insistence that they needed to plant flowers in the front yard to make it pretty, like Victoria's house. Daniel's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages he mostly ignored, until one from Victoria broke through his determination to pretend the morning hadn't happened. My father visited you. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Daniel typed back one-handed while Emma colored at the kitchen table. Define okay? He didn't threaten me, if that's what you're asking. That is what I'm asking. What did he say? That you're making a mistake with the merger and with me. Pretty standard protective father stuff. Nothing about this is standard. Can I see you today? Emma and I are planting flowers. You're welcome to join. I'll bring the good ones. The ones that don't die immediately. She arrived an hour later in jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt that looked soft and worn, her hair in a ponytail, carrying 2 flats of flowers that probably came from the kind of nursery that provided consultation services and had a sommelier for plant selection. These are pansies, she told Emma, kneeling down to show her the colorful blooms. They're tough. They can handle cold weather and still look beautiful. Like you, Emma said with the brutal honesty of 4-year-olds. Victoria laughed, surprised and genuine. Thank you, I think. They spent the afternoon in the dirt, planting flowers along the front walkway, while neighbors slowed their weekend walks to watch Victoria Hale on her hands and knees in Daniel Mercer's yard. Patricia drove by twice. Gerald actually stopped to comment on the flower selection, though his eyes kept darting between Victoria and Daniel like he was trying to solve a complex equation. Your neighborhood is very interested in us, Victoria observed after Gerald finally left. They're interested in you. I'm just the lucky disaster who lives next door. You're not a disaster. I'm a work in progress. There's a difference, but not a big one. Emma had appointed herself supervisor of the operation, directing where each flower should go with the confidence of someone who'd never done this before, but had very strong opinions anyway. Victoria followed her instructions without question, asking Emma's approval before planting each one, treating a 4-year-old's aesthetic judgment like it actually mattered. When they finished, the walkway looked genuinely better, splashes of purple and yellow and white against the still rough landscape, a promise that the house was slowly becoming something real. It's perfect, Emma declared. Now we need a garden gnome. Absolutely not, Daniel said. Victoria, don't you think we need a garden gnome? Victoria looked between them, clearly trying not to take sides. I think gnomes are a very personal choice. That's a diplomatic answer, Daniel said. I'm a CEO. Diplomacy is my job description. Emma ran inside to get her stuffed animals so they could see the beautiful flowers, and Daniel and Victoria sat on the porch steps, dirt under their fingernails, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. My father scared you, Victoria said quietly. He tried to. I'm not sure he succeeded. What did he actually say? Daniel told her, leaving out nothing. The questions about his intentions, the implications about money and status, the warning about battles and crossfire. Victoria listened with an expression that grew progressively darker. He had no right, she said when Daniel finished. He's your father. He thinks he has every right. That doesn't make it okay. She turned to face him fully. Daniel, if this, us, is going to be too complicated, if it's going to affect Emma or your work or your life here, I understand. I can step back. Do you want to step back? No, but I don't want to drag you into something that hurts you either. Daniel thought about Harrison's words, about the battle that was coming, about the very legitimate concerns for Emma's well-being and his own stability. Then he thought about Victoria covered in dirt, following a 4-year-old's flower planting instructions with complete seriousness, about the way she'd stood beside him at that dinner table, the way she'd kissed him in the garden like she was claiming something she'd been afraid to want. I don't scare easily, he said, and Emma's tougher than she looks. We can handle complicated. Are you sure? No, but I'm sure I want to try. She kissed him then, soft and quick, pulling back when they heard Emma's footsteps returning. But her hand found his and squeezed, a silent acknowledgement of the choice they were both making. The following week brought the first real consequences of that choice. It started with a call from Marcus Webb about the Riverside Plaza project. "Daniel, we need to talk about the timeline," Marcus said, his voice tight with stress Daniel hadn't heard before. "I'm getting pressure from my investors to bring in a larger firm. They're concerned about delays." "What delays?" "We're on schedule." "I know, but one of my investors is connected to Harrison Hale, and apparently there's been some talk about your professional reliability." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Talk from whom?" "I don't know specifics, just that questions are being raised about whether you can handle a project of this scope given your personal circumstances." "My personal circumstances?" "Look, I don't care about your personal life. I care about results. But these investors, they have leverage, and they're using it. I need you to give me a reason to keep you on this project." Daniel spent the next hour on the phone with Marcus, walking him through every detail of the design, every timeline milestone, every contingency plan. By the end, Marcus seemed satisfied, but the damage was done. Someone was actively trying to undermine Daniel's professional reputation, and it didn't take a genius to figure out who. He called Victoria that evening after Emma was asleep. "Your father's sabotaging my projects," he said without preamble. There was a long pause. "What happened?" Daniel explained about Marcus and the investors and the sudden concerns about his reliability. Victoria was quiet throughout, and when he finished, her voice was ice. "I'll handle it." Victoria, "I'll handle it, Daniel. This is unacceptable. Don't blow up your relationship with your father because of me. He doesn't get to attack you because he's angry with me. That's not how this works." The next day, Victoria confronted Harrison at Hale Technologies headquarters, in his corner office overlooking Charleston Harbor. Daniel only learned about it later from Victoria's shaking voice on the phone. "I told him that if he ever interfered with your career again, I would resign immediately," she said. "Not in 6 months, not after some transition period. Immediately. And I'd make sure everyone knew why." "What did he say?" "That I was being emotional and irrational. That he was simply doing due diligence on someone in my life. That any responsible father would do the same." Victoria, "Then I told him I was refusing the merger. Officially, on the record, to his face. That I'd be making a formal announcement to the board next week." Daniel sat down heavily on his couch. "You did what?" "What I should have done months ago. I told him that Hale Technologies is mine to run, and I'm running it my way. And if the board doesn't like it, they can try to remove me, but I won't make it easy. This is because of what he did to me. This is because of what he's been doing to me for years. You were just the catalyst that made me realize I'm done compromising who I am to keep everyone else comfortable." But the board didn't wait for Victoria's formal announcement. 3 days later, they called an emergency meeting. Victoria told Daniel about it that evening, sitting in his kitchen because she said her house felt too big and too empty and too much like a battlefield. "They're voting on the merger tomorrow," she said, her voice hollow. "Adrian convinced enough of them that my refusal is damaging shareholder value. They're going to approve it without my consent and dare me to fight it publicly." "Can they do that?" "Technically, yes. I'm CEO, but the board has ultimate authority over major strategic decisions. I can refuse to implement it, but then they can call for my removal." "So they're backing you into a corner. They're giving me a choice. Accept the merger and stay, or refuse and lose everything." She looked at him with eyes that held too much weight. "My father abstained from the vote. He couldn't support me, but he couldn't vote against me either. I don't know if that makes it better or worse." Emma wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Victoria, why are you sad?" Victoria managed a smile. "Just a hard day at work, sweetie." "Daddy has those too. He makes them better with ice cream." "That's actually not bad advice," Daniel said. "Come on." They ate ice cream together at the kitchen table, cheap grocery store brand that Emma declared was the best ever, and talked about everything except corporate politics. Emma told Victoria about the butterfly they'd seen at school and the new song she'd learned, and how her friend Madison had brought a hamster for show and tell. After Emma went back to bed, Victoria stayed in the kitchen, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn table surface. "I could lose it all tomorrow," she said quietly. "The company, my position, everything I've built for the last 5 years. What are you going to do?" "Fight, even if it means losing." She looked up at him. Is that crazy? No, it's brave. Brave and stupid look pretty similar from the outside. You told me that once. I still think you were wrong. Brave is knowing the cost and choosing to pay it anyway. She reached across the table, took his hand. What if the cost is too high? Then you figure out how to live with it. But at least you'll know you didn't give up who you are to avoid the bill. The board meeting happened at 2 p.m. the following day. Daniel knew because he checked his phone obsessively while trying to focus on revisions to the Riverside Plaza designs. Marcus had stuck with him despite the investor pressure, but the project felt fragile now, like one more push could topple it. At 4:30, his phone rang. Victoria. They approved the merger, she said, her voice eerily calm. Unanimous vote except my father's abstention. I'm sorry. I told them I wouldn't implement it, that they could approve whatever they wanted, but I was still CEO and I had no intention of executing a merger I believed would destroy everything valuable about Hale Technologies. How did they respond? They're calling for a vote of no confidence. Next board meeting, 2 weeks from now. If it passes, I'm out. Daniel closed his laptop. Where are you? In my car, sitting in the parking garage because I can't face going home to that empty house. Come here. Daniel, it's 4:30. Don't you have to pick up Emma? In an hour. Come here anyway. She arrived 20 minutes later, still in her work clothes, her composure cracking at the edges. Daniel pulled her inside, sat her down on his couch, and made terrible tea because the good stuff had run out and he hadn't replaced it. I should have just said yes, Victoria said, staring at the mug in her hands. Agreed to the merger, kept my position as co-CEO, made everyone happy. Would that have made you happy? No, but I'd still have a job. You'd have a title. That's not the same as a job you actually want. It's better than nothing. Is it? Daniel sat beside her. Claire used to say that sometimes nothing is better than the wrong something. That empty space at least gives you room to build what you actually want. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Your wife sounds like she was wise. She had her moments, usually right before I was about to make a terrible decision. What terrible decision are you about to make now? I'm not. You are. He turned to face her fully. You're about to decide whether you're going to fight for what you believe in or accept what everyone else thinks is best for you. And I can't make that decision for you, but I can tell you that either way, you're not alone in it. She set down the tea, turned to him with an expression that was equal parts vulnerable and determined. If I fight this and lose, I lose everything. The company, my career, my father's respect, everything I've spent my entire adult life building. Probably. But if I don't fight, I lose myself. And I don't know how to come back from that. Then fight. Just like that? Just like that. She kissed him then, desperate and searching, and Daniel kissed her back with everything he couldn't put into words. The promise that she didn't have to face this alone. The understanding of what it meant to risk everything on a choice that terrified you. The simple human need to hold on to something real when everything else was falling apart. They broke apart when Emma's voice called from her room, asking for water. Victoria laughed, wiping at her eyes. Your daughter has impeccable timing. She really does. Daniel got Emma her water, then came back to find Victoria standing at his front window, looking out at the street that was becoming familiar to both of them. I'm going to need a lawyer, she said. A good one. Someone who specializes in corporate governance and isn't afraid of Harrison Hale. Do you know someone? I know several, but using them will cost a fortune, and I don't know if I have the resources to sustain a long legal battle if it comes to that. What about your own money? The stuff that's separate from the company? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Most of my wealth is tied up in Hale Technologies stock. If they remove me as CEO, the value will drop, and I'll lose a significant portion of my net worth. I'll still be comfortable, but not billionaire comfortable. Not fight a legal war against my own company comfortable. So you'd be regular rich instead of stupid rich. Something like that. Could you live with that? She turned from the window. I could, but it's not just about money. If I lose my platform, my influence, everything I've worked for. I become a cautionary tale about stubborn women who don't know when to compromise. Or you become a story about someone who refused to compromise herself even when it was expensive. Daniel stood, moved to stand beside her at the window. Either way, it's your story, not theirs. They picked up Emma from school together, and if the other parents noticed that Victoria Hale looked like she'd been crying and Daniel looked like he was holding himself together by sheer willpower, they were polite enough not to mention it. Emma chattered the whole way home about the science experiment they'd done with vinegar and baking soda, completely unaware that the adults in her life were navigating increasingly dangerous waters. That evening, while Emma colored and Victoria helped Daniel make dinner in his cramped kitchen, Adrian Cole called. Victoria looked at her phone, then at Daniel. "It's him. You don't have to answer." "Yes, I do." She stepped out onto the porch, and Daniel tried not to listen but couldn't help hearing fragments through the screen door. "I know you orchestrated this." "No, I don't believe that. Because you've wanted my company since the day you met me. Don't pretend this is about business strategy." When she came back inside, her face was flushed with anger. "He says the board vote wasn't his idea, that he actually tried to talk them out of moving so quickly, that he wants to meet with me privately to discuss a compromise." "Do you believe him?" "I don't know. He sounded sincere, but Adrian's always sincere. That's his gift." "Are you going to meet with him?" "I don't see how I have a choice. If there's any possibility of resolving this without a full board war, I have to try." Daniel understood the logic, even as something in his chest tightened at the thought of Victoria sitting down with Adrian Cole, but he kept his voice neutral. "When?" "Tomorrow. Lunch at his office." "Do you want company?" "I don't think bringing you to a private meeting with Adrian is going to help the situation." "Probably not." She moved closer, her hands finding his. "But I appreciate the offer, and I appreciate everything you've been doing. This isn't your fight, Daniel. You don't have to—" "It became my fight when your father started sabotaging my career. It became my fight when you showed up at my door looking lost. It became my fight when I decided I cared about you." He pulled her closer. "So stop trying to protect me from it." Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Are you guys going to kiss again? Because if you are, I'm going to watch TV." Victoria laughed despite everything. "We're not going to kiss right now." "Okay, good, because kissing is boring. Daddy, can I have a snack?" The rest of the evening passed in domestic normality that felt both grounding and surreal. They ate dinner together, Emma monopolizing the conversation with questions about whether butterflies had favorite colors and if clouds ever got tired of floating. After dinner, Victoria helped with Emma's bath, reading her a story while Daniel cleaned up the kitchen. When Emma was finally asleep, they sat on the porch in the October darkness, the street quiet around them. "Thank you," Victoria said. "For what?" "For making this feel manageable. For giving me a place where the world isn't falling apart." "The world's still falling apart. We're just falling apart together." "That's weirdly comforting." "I'm a weirdly comforting person." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into night. Somewhere a dog barked. A car passed. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives that had nothing to do with corporate battles or billion-dollar mergers. "What happens if you lose?" Daniel asked finally. "I start over. Find something else to do with my life. Maybe something that doesn't involve boards and shareholders and constant battles for control." "Like what?" "I don't know. I've been Victoria Hale, daughter of Harrison Hale, CEO of Hale Technologies, for so long that I'm not sure who I am without all those titles. You're someone who plants flowers with 4-year-olds and drinks terrible tea and shows up on strangers' porches when life gets too hard. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing compared to running a billion-dollar company. Then you haven't been paying attention. Emma will remember the flower planting a lot longer than any shareholder will remember your quarterly earnings reports." Victoria lifted her head to look at him. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just a single father who learned the hard way that titles don't mean anything when you're sitting in a hospital room watching someone die." Claire was a senior partner at her law firm, brilliant, accomplished, respected. And none of that mattered at the end. What mattered was that she was kind, and she laughed at my terrible jokes, and she loved Emma with everything she had. That's what I remember, not her billable hours. "I'm not dying." "No, but you're killing yourself trying to be everything everyone expects. And I'm saying maybe it's okay to just be Victoria, not Victoria Hale, CEO. Not Victoria Hale, daughter of Harrison, just Victoria." She was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then learn. You've got time. Do I? In 2 weeks, the board might vote me out. Then what? Then you figure out the next thing. People rebuild their lives all the time. I'm doing it right now. You had to rebuild because your wife died. That's different. The reason doesn't matter as much as the choice. You can either spend your life trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, or you can build something new. It's scary, and it's hard, and it might fail spectacularly, but at least it's yours. Victoria kissed him again, slower this time, like she was trying to memorize the feeling. When she pulled back, there were tears on her face. I'm falling in love with you, she said, and it sounded like a confession and an accusation all at once. And I don't know if I have room in my life for that right now. Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could feel it. Make room. Just like that? Just like that. She laughed and cried at the same time, and Daniel held her while she did both, while the Carolina night wrapped around them and the future loomed uncertain and terrifying and somehow, impossibly, full of promise. Victoria's meeting with Adrian the next day lasted 3 hours, and when she finally called Daniel afterward, her voice carried a tension he hadn't heard before. He offered me a way out, she said without preamble. Daniel was at his drafting table, trying to focus on the Riverside Plaza elevations while Emma played in the living room. He set down his pencil. What kind of way out? Co-CEOs for real, not just on paper. Equal authority, equal decision-making power. He'd pull his support from the board vote if I agree to work with him instead of against him. And you believe he means it? That's the problem. I think he actually does. She sounded exhausted. He showed me projections, Daniel. What the combined companies could accomplish, the market share we could capture, the innovations we could fund. It was compelling. Something cold settled in Daniel's stomach. So what did you tell him? That I needed time to think about it, that I couldn't make a decision that big without considering all the implications. Did he give you time? Until Friday, 3 days before the board vote. She paused. He also said something else, something that made me realize how carefully he's been playing this. What? He said he admired my integrity, that watching me fight for what I believe in reminded him why he got into this business in the first place, that he didn't want to be the person who crushed that spirit. Her voice turned bitter. He actually used the word spirit, like I'm some kind of inspirational poster. Maybe he meant it. Or maybe he's smart enough to know that appealing to my values is more effective than threatening my position. She sighed. I don't know anymore, Daniel. I can't tell if he's being genuine or if this is just a more sophisticated manipulation. What does your gut say? My gut says I'm too tired to trust it. My gut says I've been fighting for so long that I don't remember what I'm fighting for anymore. Emma appeared beside Daniel, tugging on his sleeve. Daddy, I'm hungry. Can we have mac and cheese? Daniel covered the phone. In a minute, sweetheart. Go pick out which kind you want. Emma ran off toward the kitchen, and Daniel returned his attention to Victoria. Where are you now? Still at my office, staring at the same projections Adrian showed me, trying to figure out if he's right. If maybe partnership is smarter than pride. That's not pride, Victoria. That's self-preservation. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm risking everything, my company, my career, my relationship with my father, just to prove a point. And maybe Adrian's right. Maybe I could accomplish more by working with him than by fighting him. Daniel wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she should trust her instincts, that compromise with someone like Adrian Cole would only lead to losing herself piece by piece. But he also knew that this wasn't his decision to make, and pushing too hard would only make her defensive. What do you want me to say? He asked quietly. I don't know. That I'm not crazy for considering this? That it's okay to be exhausted and scared and maybe ready to stop fighting? You're not crazy. And it's definitely okay to be exhausted. But Victoria, the question isn't whether you should stop fighting. It's whether accepting Adrian's offer would actually let you stop, or if it would just change what you're fighting against. She was quiet for so long Daniel thought the call had dropped. Then, can I come over tonight after Emma goes to bed? Of course. I just need to be somewhere that feels real for a while. My office feels like a cage right now. She arrived at 9:30. After Emma was asleep, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Daniel's mortgage payment. They sat on the porch in the November cold, wrapped in blankets, passing the bottle back and forth because Daniel's wine glasses were still packed in a box somewhere. Adrian's father and my father were business partners for years, Victoria said, staring out at the dark street. They built their companies together, then split amicably when their visions diverged. Adrian and I have known each other since we were teenagers. He was at my college graduation. I was at his wedding. He's married? Was. Divorced 3 years ago. No kids, which he claimed was mutual, but I always suspected was her decision. She took a drink directly from the bottle. The point is, we have history. We have, and part of me wonders if my resistance to this merger is about the business or about refusing to let our father's vision dictate our future. Does it matter which it is? Shouldn't it? If I'm making decisions based on family dynamics instead of business strategy, that's not exactly rational leadership. Who said leadership has to be rational? Some of the best decisions I ever made were the irrational ones. Leaving Chicago, buying this disaster of a house, letting myself care about you. None of those made sense on paper. And do you regret them? Not even a little bit. Victoria turned to look at him, and in the porch light, she looked younger and more uncertain than he'd ever seen her. What if I'm wrong, Daniel? What if I refuse this offer and lose everything, and then 5 years from now I realize I was just being stubborn and stupid? Then you'll be stubborn and stupid and starting over. But at least you'll know you made the choice yourself instead of letting fear make it for you. That's easy to say when it's not your entire career on the line. You're right, it's not my career. But it is my relationship with you, which means I have a stake in this whether you want me to or not. He took the wine bottle, set it aside, and took her hands instead. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I am going to tell you what I see. I see someone who built something remarkable and is now being told it's not good enough unless she shares it with someone who wants to take credit for it. I see someone who's exhausted from fighting, but would be even more exhausted from pretending to be okay with a decision she hates. And I see someone who's falling in love with me while trying to save her company, which is honestly terrible timing, but also kind of perfect. Victoria laughed, watery and real. It is terrible timing. The worst. And you're okay with that? With being involved with someone whose life is currently a corporate nightmare? My wife died of cancer when our daughter was 2. I rebuilt my entire life from scratch while grieving and trying to be a good father. I think I can handle corporate drama. She kissed him then, wine sweet and desperate, and Daniel kissed her back with the understanding that this was about more than attraction or comfort. This was about two people choosing each other in the middle of chaos, which was either the bravest thing or the stupidest thing, and he honestly didn't care which. When they finally broke apart, Victoria rested her forehead against his. I'm going to refuse Adrian's offer. Are you sure? No. But I'm sure that if I accept it, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering who I could have been if I'd been braver. And I don't want to be that person. Then don't be. She stayed until past midnight, talking through her strategy for the board meeting, the arguments she would make, the allies she might still have. Daniel listened and offered what insight he could, though they both knew his understanding of corporate politics was limited at best. When she finally left, walking back across the lawn to her estate, Daniel sat on his porch and thought about bravery and stupidity and the thin line between them. Then he went inside and checked on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that the adults in her life were navigating waters that could change everything. The next 3 days passed in a blur of tension and waiting. Victoria drafted her formal response to Adrian's offer, consulted with lawyers about her legal standing, and made calls to board members who might be persuaded to support her position. Daniel worked on the Riverside Plaza project, which had become both a welcome distraction and a reminder that his own professional stability was still fragile. On Thursday evening, Harrison Hale appeared on Daniel's porch for the second time. "May I come in?" he asked, and this time there was no commanding presence, just an old man who looked tired. They sat in the living room because Emma was at a play date and the house was quiet. Harrison took in the space with the same assessing gaze as before, but something in his expression had shifted. "Victoria told me she's refusing Adrian's offer," he said without preamble. "She did. She also told me that you encouraged her to do so." "I encouraged her to make her own decision. There's a difference." Harrison studied him for a long moment. Do you love my daughter, Mr. Mercer? The directness of the question caught Daniel off guard. Yes. And she loves you? You'd have to ask her. I did. She said yes. Harrison leaned back in Daniel's worn armchair. Which puts me in an interesting position. I've spent the last month trying to convince myself you're a gold digger or an opportunist or someone taking advantage of my daughter's vulnerability. But you're not any of those things, are you? No. You're just a man who happened to move in next door and happened to connect with a woman who happened to be worth billions of dollars. That's about right. And now you're both in love, and she's about to throw away her career because she'd rather fight than compromise. And I'm supposed to accept all of this as normal. Daniel considered his response carefully. With respect, Mr. Hale, normal is overrated. Normal would have been Victoria accepting that merger, keeping everyone happy, and losing herself in the process. I don't think that's what you want for her any more than I do. What I want is for her to be smart, to think long-term instead of making emotional decisions. She is being smart. She's thinking about who she wants to be in 20 years, not just what makes sense in the next quarterly report. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Adrian called me today, said Victoria had refused his offer and that he was disappointed but respected her decision. Then he said he'd be voting with the board on Friday to remove her as CEO. Daniel felt his chest tighten. So he was manipulating her all along. Perhaps, or perhaps he genuinely gave her a choice and is now following through on the consequences of that choice. Harrison stood, moved to the window that looked out toward his daughter's estate. I abstained from the first vote because I couldn't choose between my company and my daughter. But I can't abstain tomorrow. The board will see it as weakness, and Victoria will see it as abandonment. What are you going to do? I don't know. He turned to face Daniel. Tell me honestly, do you think she can win this fight? Define win. If you mean keep her position as CEO, probably not. The board has the votes. But if you mean keep her integrity and her sense of self, yeah, I think she can win that. That's not good enough. She needs both. Why? Why does she need to be CEO of Hale Technologies specifically? Why can't she be CEO of something else, something she builds herself without the weight of your legacy on her shoulders? Harrison's expression hardened. Because Hale Technologies is her birthright. I built it for her. You built it for yourself. She just inherited it along with all the expectations and limitations that came with it. Daniel stood to face him directly. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe she needs to build something that's actually hers instead of trying to live up to something you created. You're very confident in your opinions for someone who's known my daughter for 6 weeks. I'm confident because I see her clearly. You see the CEO, the legacy, the company. I see Victoria. And Victoria is better than any title you could give her. Harrison stared at him for a long moment, and Daniel couldn't read his expression. Then, unexpectedly, the older man's face softened. My wife died when Victoria was 12, he said quietly. Cancer, like your wife. And I threw myself into building the company because I didn't know how else to process the grief. Victoria grew up watching me work 80-hour weeks, and somewhere along the way, she decided that was what love looked like. Dedication to the work. That's not love. That's avoidance. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Harrison moved toward the door. I'm telling you this because you need to understand that Victoria's relationship with that company is complicated. It's not just a job or a career. It's how she learned to connect with me after her mother died. Losing it would mean losing that connection. Or it would mean finding a new way to connect, one that's not built on work and expectations. Harrison paused at the door. I haven't decided how I'm voting tomorrow. But I want you to know that regardless of what happens, I'm glad my daughter has you, even if I wish the circumstances were different. After he left, Daniel stood in his living room and tried to process what had just happened. Harrison Hale, the man who'd threatened him and questioned his motives and tried to sabotage his career, had just essentially given his blessing. It felt surreal and insufficient and somehow deeply sad all at the same time. He called Victoria immediately. Your father was just here, he said when she answered. I know. He texted me that he was going to talk to you. What did he say? Daniel told her everything, the questions about love, the revelation about her mother, the uncertainty about tomorrow's vote. Victoria was quiet throughout. He's not going to vote for me, she said finally. He wants to, but he won't. The company means too much to him. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've known my father my entire life. When it comes down to choosing between me and Hale Technologies, the company wins. It always has. Victoria, it's okay, Daniel. I've made peace with it. Or I'm trying to. She paused. Can I see you tomorrow, before the meeting? Of course. What time? The meeting's at 2. Come to my office at noon? I'll be there. Friday arrived cold and gray, November asserting itself with the kind of weather that matched the weight of the day ahead. Daniel dropped Emma at school with instructions for Patricia to pick her up since he didn't know how long he'd be at Victoria's office. Hale Technologies occupied a modern building downtown, all glass and steel and the kind of architectural ambition that Daniel could appreciate even as he found it soulless. The receptionist directed him to the executive floor, where Victoria's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, was waiting. She's expecting you, Margaret said, leading him down a hallway lined with awards and photos documenting the company's history. Fair warning, she's been here since 5 a.m. and has consumed enough coffee to fuel a small army. Victoria's office was exactly what Daniel expected. Large, minimalist, with windows overlooking Charleston and furniture that probably cost more than his house. But what surprised him were the personal touches. Photos of her with people who were clearly friends rather than business associates. A shelf of books that had nothing to do with technology or business. A small plant that looked well cared for. She stood at the window when he entered, still in jeans and a sweater, her work clothes hanging on a nearby rack. 2 hours until I find out if I still have a career, she said, without turning around. Daniel moved to stand beside her. How are you feeling? Terrified. Relieved. Ready for it to be over. She finally looked at him. Is that strange? That part of me just wants the vote to happen so I can stop waiting for it? Not strange at all. I called every board member I thought might support me, gave them my whole speech about vision and independence and long-term thinking. You know how many committed to voting against my removal? How many? 2 out of 12. Even with my father's abstention, that means I lose 8-2. So you're going to lose. Spectacularly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Adrian called this morning, said it wasn't personal, that he hoped we could maintain a professional relationship, that he'd be open to me consulting for the merged company if I wanted. Generous of him. That's what I thought. Then he said something else. He said my father had called him last night, asked him to reconsider pushing for my removal, said that Harrison had told him I was his daughter, and he didn't want to see me humiliated publicly. Daniel's heart ached at the image of Harrison Hale making that call, trying to protect his daughter even as he couldn't bring himself to vote for her. What did Adrian say? The business was business, and personal feelings couldn't override fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Victoria moved to her desk, picked up a folder. This is my resignation letter. I wrote it this morning. You're resigning? Before the vote? After. If they vote to remove me, I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to resign immediately and announce that I'm starting my own company. Something completely independent, built from scratch, without any ties to Hale Technologies or my father's legacy. Victoria, that's terrifying and possibly stupid and probably going to fail, she finished. But it's mine. And right now that matters more than anything else. She handed him the folder, and Daniel read through the resignation letter. It was professional, gracious, and completely final. No door left open for reconciliation, no suggestion that she might reconsider, just a clean break and a clear statement of intent. You've really thought this through, he said. I've been thinking about it for weeks, ever since that first dinner with my father and Adrian. I just wasn't ready to admit it until now. She took the folder back, set it aside. The industry will say I failed, that I couldn't handle the pressure of running a major company. Business journals will write think pieces about what I did wrong, what I should have done differently. Let them. And I'll have to start completely over. New company, new team, new everything. It could take years to build something significant. Probably. I'll have less money, less influence, less of everything that used to define me. True. She looked at him directly. And you're okay with all of that? With me being just Victoria instead of Victoria Hale? Billionaire CEO? I was never dating the billionaire CEO. I was dating the woman who planted flowers with my daughter and drank terrible tea on my porch. He moved closer, took her hands. The rest is just noise. She kissed him then, soft and grateful, and Daniel held her while the clock ticked toward 2 p.m. and the moment that would change everything. At 1:30, Victoria changed into her work clothes, a navy suit that looked like armor and probably cost more than Daniel's car. She redid her hair, put on her CEO face, and transformed back into the polished professional the world expected to see. "You don't have to come to the meeting," she said. "It's just going to be uncomfortable and hostile and watching people I've worked with for years vote to remove me. I know, I'm coming anyway." The boardroom was exactly what Daniel expected. Mahogany table, leather chairs, wall-mounted screens displaying corporate data. Board members filed in with the careful courtesy of people about to do something unpleasant. Harrison arrived last, not meeting his daughter's eyes. Adrian Cole sat at the far end of the table, impeccably dressed and completely calm. Daniel took a seat against the wall, technically just an observer, but present enough to matter. Victoria sat at the head of the table in her CEO chair for what might be the last time. The meeting started with procedural formality, the chairman, an older man named Robert Chen, reading through the agenda with careful neutrality. Then came the discussion of the merger, Victoria's refusal, and the motion for a vote of no confidence. Victoria spoke for 15 minutes, laying out her vision for Hale Technologies' future, the risks of the merger, her track record of success. She was compelling and passionate and completely honest about her concerns. When she finished, there was silence. Then Adrian spoke. "I respect Victoria's passion and her commitment to her vision, but passion doesn't override the board's responsibility to shareholders. The merger represents significant value creation and strategic positioning. Victoria's refusal to execute it demonstrates a concerning prioritization of personal preference over fiduciary duty." More discussion followed, but Daniel could see it was theater. The votes were decided. This was just the performance before the inevitable conclusion. Finally, Robert Chen called for the vote. "All in favor of the motion of no confidence in Victoria Hale as CEO of Hale Technologies?" Hands rose around the table. Daniel counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Exactly as Victoria had predicted. Opposed? 2 hands. The supporters Victoria had mentioned. Abstentions? Harrison Hale's hand rose slowly, and Daniel saw Victoria's jaw tighten. "The motion passes," Robert Chen announced. "Effective immediately, Victoria Hale is removed as CEO of Hale Technologies. We'll convene a separate meeting to discuss transition and interim leadership." Victoria stood, and every eye in the room turned to her. She pulled out the resignation letter she'd prepared, placed it on the table. "You don't need a transition plan," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm resigning from the board effective immediately, and I'm announcing that I'm starting my own company, one focused on the kind of innovation and ethical technology development that I believe this industry desperately needs but rarely prioritizes." There were murmurs around the table. Harrison finally looked at his daughter, his expression unreadable. "Victoria," he started. "Thank you for the opportunity to lead this company," she continued, ignoring him. "I'm proud of what we accomplished together, but I'm more excited about what comes next." She turned and walked out of the boardroom without waiting for a response. Daniel followed, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and an old man who looked like he'd just lost something irreplaceable. In the elevator down to the lobby, Victoria was silent. Her hands shook slightly, and Daniel took them in his. "You did it," he said quietly. "I just destroyed my entire career in 15 minutes. "No, you just saved it." She laughed, shaky and disbelieving. "Tell me that in 6 months when I'm scrambling to find funding and no one will take my calls." "I'll tell you now, you're free, Victoria. Actually free. Everything that comes next is yours to build." The elevator doors opened and they walked through the lobby together. Outside, November rain had started to fall, cold and cleansing. Victoria stood on the sidewalk, letting it soak through her expensive suit, and Daniel stood beside her. "What now?" she asked. "Now you come home with me, change into comfortable clothes, help me make dinner for Emma, and we figure out the rest as we go." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She took his hand and they walked through the rain toward Daniel's car, leaving behind the glass tower and the corporate life and everything that had defined her for so long. Somewhere in that building, her father was processing what had just happened. Somewhere in the city, Adrian Cole was probably already planning the merger, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the woman beside him who'd just chosen courage over comfort, freedom over security, herself over everyone else's expectations. And what mattered was that when they got home to Birchwood Lane, Emma would be waiting with a new drawing to show Victoria and questions about whether they could have chocolate chip pancakes for dinner because it was Friday and Fridays should be special. The rain fell harder, and Victoria laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and bright. And Daniel knew they'd be okay. Not immediately, and not easily, but eventually. They'd figure it out together. Emma did indeed want chocolate chip pancakes for dinner, and she wanted Victoria to help make them. And she wanted to know why Victoria's fancy suit was all wet, and if that meant she could jump in puddles too. "Your suit costs more than my car," Daniel pointed out as Victoria stood dripping in his kitchen. "Maybe change first before we start cooking?" "I don't have anything here to change into." "Then go home and grab something. We'll wait." But Victoria shook her head, something fierce and final in her expression. "No, I'm done with that house. I'm done with all of it. Can I borrow something of yours?" So Victoria Hale, former billionaire CEO, ended up in Daniel's old flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants that were too long for her, making chocolate chip pancakes with a 4-year-old who insisted on adding twice the recommended amount of chocolate chips because more is always better. They ate dinner on the floor of the living room because Emma declared it more fun that way, and nobody had the energy to argue. Afterward, Emma fell asleep mid-sentence while telling Victoria an elaborate story about a princess who lived in a house made of butterflies, and Daniel carried her to bed while Victoria cleaned up the kitchen. When he returned, Victoria was standing at the sink, staring out the window at her estate next door, all lit up and empty. "I need to sell it," she said quietly. "The house. I can't live there anymore." "That's a big decision to make on the same day you lost your job." "I didn't lose my job. I quit." She turned to face him. "And it's not a big decision. It's the only decision that makes sense. That house was never mine. It was the CEO's house, the successful daughter's house, the person I was supposed to be's house. I don't need all that space for just me." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere that feels like home instead of a museum." She moved closer to him. "Can I stay here tonight? I know it's presumptuous and we haven't really talked about what this is between us, but I can't go back there right now." "Of course you can stay." They ended up on the couch, Victoria curled against Daniel's chest, both of them exhausted from a day that had fundamentally altered the trajectory of her life. She fell asleep first, her breathing evening out, and Daniel sat there thinking about how strange life was, that 6 weeks ago he'd been a single father trying to survive one day at a time. And now he was holding a woman who'd just walked away from a billion-dollar empire because she'd rather lose everything than lose herself. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Patricia told me Victoria Hale spent the night at your place. Please tell me you know what you're doing." Daniel typed back one-handed. "Absolutely no idea. But I'm doing it anyway. That's what I was afraid of. Be careful, little brother. Too late for that." Victoria stirred, lifting her head. "Sorry, didn't mean to fall asleep on you." "It's okay. You've had a long day. The longest." She sat up, running her hands through her hair. "Daniel, I need to tell you something. Something I should have mentioned before but was too afraid to." "Okay." "When I sell the estate, I'll still have money. A lot of money. But most of my net worth was tied up in Hale Technologies stock. And after today's announcement, that stock is going to drop. Maybe significantly. I could end up with a fraction of what I had before." "And you're worried I'll care about that?" "I'm worried about being honest with you about what my life is about to look like. I'm starting a company from scratch, with diminished resources and a reputation as someone who walked away from a successful position. Investors are going to be skeptical. Clients are going to question my judgment. The next few years are going to be a struggle." "Good thing I'm experienced with struggle, then." She smiled despite herself. "I'm serious, Daniel. This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth doing is. You told me that, remember? That first night when you showed up on my porch looking lost. I was lost. And now you're found. Maybe not in the way you expected, but found nonetheless." She kissed him then, soft and lingering, and when she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. "I'm falling in love with you," she said again, like she needed to confirm it was still true. even though it's too fast and too complicated and probably a terrible idea given everything else that's happening. It's definitely all of those things, Daniel agreed. But I'm falling in love with you too, so I guess we're both making terrible decisions. What are we doing, Daniel? Really? Building something new, both of us, and figuring out how to do it together. Just like that? Just like that. She stayed that night, sleeping in Daniel's bed while he took the couch because Emma would ask questions if she found Victoria there in the morning, and they hadn't figured out how to explain this yet. But around 3 a.m., Victoria appeared in the living room, unable to sleep, and Daniel made terrible tea again because it was all he had. They talked until dawn about everything: her plans for the new company, his concerns about the Riverside Plaza project, Emma's upcoming 5th birthday, the logistics of selling a mansion, the fear that they were moving too fast, the equally strong fear that they weren't moving fast enough. When Emma woke up at 6:30 and found Victoria still there, she accepted it with the easy adaptability of childhood. "Are you going to live here now?" Emma asked over breakfast. Victoria looked to Daniel, uncertain how to answer. "Victoria's going to be spending more time here while she figures some things out," Daniel said carefully. "Is that okay with you?" Emma considered this seriously. "Will you help me with my butterfly project for school?" "I would love to help with your butterfly project," Victoria said. "Then it's okay." If only all of life's complicated questions could be resolved so simply. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change and adjustment. Victoria did sell the estate to a tech entrepreneur from California who didn't care about Charleston society or the story behind why the house was suddenly available. The sale gave her the capital she needed to fund her new company, which she named Meridian Solutions, with a focus on ethical AI and sustainable technology development. She moved into a smaller house 3 blocks from Daniel, close enough to walk over but far enough to maintain some independence. Emma declared the new house much better because it has a swing in the backyard, and Victoria spent her first weekend there installing said swing with Daniel's help. But not everything was smooth. The tech industry gossip mill worked overtime analyzing Victoria's departure from Hale Technologies. Business journals ran think pieces with titles like "When Pride Costs Billions" and "The Fall of Victoria Hale." Adrian Cole gave interviews expressing regret that things had ended badly, while carefully positioning himself as the reasonable party who'd tried to find compromise. And Harrison Hale said nothing publicly, but his silence spoke volumes. 2 months after the board vote, on a Sunday afternoon in January, Harrison appeared at Daniel's house for the 3rd time. Emma was at a birthday party, and Victoria happened to be there, helping Daniel replace the broken disposal unit under the kitchen sink. Daniel answered the door to find the older man holding a small wrapped box, looking more uncertain than Daniel had ever seen him. "Is my daughter here?" Harrison asked without preamble. "She is. Do you want to come in?" Harrison entered slowly, taking in the domestic scene. Victoria on the floor under the sink in old jeans and one of Daniel's t-shirts, tools scattered around her, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Hi, Dad," she said without getting up, her voice carefully neutral. "Victoria," he held out the box. "I brought you something for your birthday." Victoria's birthday had been the week before. Daniel had made her a cake that Emma had insisted on decorating with enough frosting to give someone a sugar coma. They'd celebrated quietly, just the 3 of them, and Victoria had said it was the best birthday she'd had in years. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on a rag, and took the box. Inside was a vintage watch, elegant and understated. "It was your mother's," Harrison said quietly. "She wore it every day. I've been keeping it for you, waiting for the right time. I thought—" He paused. "I thought maybe now was that time." Victoria stared at the watch, and Daniel could see her fighting to maintain composure. "Thank you," she managed finally. "I also came to apologize." Harrison's voice was rough. "For abstaining from the vote, for not supporting you when you needed it, for putting the company before my daughter." "Dad, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "After you left, after you started Meridian, I watched what happened to Hale Technologies. The merger went through. Adrian became CEO. The company's value increased by 20% in the first quarter." "Then you made the right business decision," Victoria said, but there was pain in her voice. "The company's value increased," Harrison continued, "but something else disappeared. The innovation pipeline dried up. The employee satisfaction scores dropped. The projects you'd championed, the ones focused on sustainable development and ethical AI, were scrapped in favor of more profitable ventures. He looked directly at his daughter. We made money, but we lost what made us worth the money. Victoria set the watch box down carefully. What are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong. About the merger, about Adrian, about what you needed to do. You weren't being stubborn or emotional. You were being right. And I was too caught up in legacy and business strategy to see it. The silence in Daniel's kitchen was profound. Daniel stayed back, knowing this moment belonged to them. I resigned from the Hale Technologies board last week, Harrison continued. I still own shares, but I'm no longer involved in operations. And I want to invest in Meridian, not as a father trying to buy back his daughter's affection, but as an investor who believes in what you're building. Dad, I don't need your money. I know you don't. You've been bootstrapping Meridian with your own capital and outside investors, and from what I can see, you're doing remarkably well. He smiled slightly. Better than well, actually. You landed the Morrison contract last month. That's a major coup for a company that's only been operational for 8 weeks. Victoria looked surprised. You've been following my company? Of course I have. You're my daughter, and you're building something important. He glanced at Daniel. With the support of someone who clearly cares about you more than he cares about your net worth. Dad, this is Daniel. I know you've met before, but I know who he is, and I know that he's good for you in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. Harrison extended his hand to Daniel. Thank you for taking care of my daughter, for helping her find the courage to choose herself. Daniel shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the genuine gratitude in the older man's eyes. She didn't need my help with the courage. That was all her. Perhaps, but having someone believe in you makes the courage easier to access. Harrison turned back to Victoria. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to be your father again instead of your business advisor. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for months. I don't know how to do that. We've been father and CEO, founder and successor for so long that I don't remember how to just be your daughter. Then we learned together. Just like we had to learn after your mother died. She moved forward and hugged him, and Harrison held his daughter like she was precious and breakable and exactly where she belonged. Daniel quietly excused himself to the porch, giving them privacy for a reunion that had been months in the making. When Victoria finally joined him outside 20 minutes later, her eyes were red, but her expression was lighter than he'd seen since the board vote. He wants to have dinner next week, she said. All of us. You, me, Emma. As a family. Are you ready for that? Probably not, but I want to try. She leaned against the porch railing. He also told me something interesting. Adrian's already being challenged by the Hale Technologies board. Turns out his great merger isn't performing as well as projected, and people are starting to question whether removing me was the right call. How do you feel about that? Vindicated. And also completely unconcerned because I'm too busy building something I actually care about to waste energy on schadenfreude. She took his hand. Daniel, Meridian is working, like actually working. We landed 2 more contracts this week, and I have investors interested in a second round of funding. This could actually become something significant. I never doubted it. I did, constantly. But then I'd come here, and I'd watch you work on this house, piece by piece, and I'd see Emma growing and changing, and I'd remember that building something meaningful takes time, that not everything has to happen on a quarterly timeline. The spring came slowly to Charleston, bringing with it the kind of renewal that made everything feel possible. The Riverside Plaza project completed on time and under budget, earning Daniel recognition in the local architecture community and 3 new clients. Emma turned 5 with a birthday party in Daniel's backyard that Victoria helped plan and that somehow ended up with 20 children and a bounce house. Meridian Solutions grew steadily, attracting talent from larger tech companies who wanted to work on projects that prioritized ethics alongside profit. Victoria hired a CFO, a CTO, and began the process of building a company culture that reflected her values rather than industry standards. And slowly, carefully, Daniel and Victoria built a life together that didn't look like either of them had expected, but felt more real than anything that had come before. On a warm evening in late April, Daniel was working on the final touches of his house renovation when Victoria arrived looking nervous and excited in equal measure. I need to tell you something, she said, and the seriousness in her tone made Daniel set down his tools immediately. "Okay, should I be worried?" "I don't think so. I hope not." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." The world seemed to stop and restart all at once. Daniel stared at her, processing words that should have made sense but felt too enormous to comprehend. "Pregnant," he repeated. "About 6 weeks. I didn't realize until last week because everything's been so chaotic with Meridian and I wasn't paying attention to my cycle and—" She stopped. "Say something, please." Daniel crossed the space between them in 2 steps and kissed her, deep and sure, and full of all the emotions he couldn't find words for yet. When he finally pulled back, he was grinning like an idiot. "We're having a baby." "We are." Which is terrible timing because Meridian is still in growth phase and your house renovation isn't finished and Emma's only 5 and this is going to be complicated and— "Victoria, stop!" He cupped her face in his hands. "This is wonderful news, terrifying and complicated and absolutely wonderful." "Are you sure? Because we've only been together for 6 months and this is fast and everything about us has been fast. Why should this be different?" She laughed, relief flooding her features. "We're going to need a bigger house. We're going to need a lot of things, but we'll figure it out." Just like that? Just like that. Emma's reaction to the news was typically Emma. She wanted to know if the baby would be a boy or a girl, if they could name it Butterfly regardless of gender, and if this meant she would have to share her room because I have a lot of important stuff in there. They assured her the baby would have its own room, that she could help pick the name, within reason, and that being a big sister was going to be the most important job she'd ever had. Harrison's reaction was more emotional than Daniel expected. The older man actually cried when Victoria told him over dinner, and he spent the rest of the evening talking about Victoria as a baby, about her mother's pregnancy, about the continuation of family in ways that transcended business and legacy. "Your mother would have loved this," he said to Victoria as the evening wound down. "She would have loved Daniel and Emma and this new baby. She would have been proud of you for choosing happiness over expectations." The pregnancy progressed through the summer months, and life settled into a new normal. Victoria's company continued to grow, though she stepped back from some responsibilities as her due date approached. Daniel finished the house renovation and started taking on larger architectural projects. Emma started kindergarten and announced that she was going to teach the baby everything she knew, which was either promising or terrifying depending on your perspective. And Harrison became a regular presence in their lives. Not the demanding patriarch, but a grandfather who built block towers with Emma and asked Victoria about her work with genuine interest rather than criticism. On a cool evening in November, almost exactly a year after Victoria had first knocked on Daniel's door with a flashlight, she went into labor. The baby arrived after 14 hours of labor that Victoria handled with the same determination she'd brought to everything else, refusing an epidural until hour 10, squeezing Daniel's hand hard enough to leave bruises, and announcing halfway through that she'd changed her mind about the whole thing and wanted a refund. But when the doctor finally placed their daughter in Victoria's arms, all the pain and fear dissolved into pure wonder. "She's perfect," Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She is," Daniel agreed, his own vision blurring. Emma, who'd been waiting with Harrison and Maya in the hallway, was finally allowed in to meet her new sister. She approached the hospital bed with the careful gravity of someone who understood this was an important moment. "She's really small," Emma observed. "You were that small once," Daniel said. "She doesn't look like a butterfly." "We talked about this, sweetheart. We're naming her Claire." Emma considered the tiny baby wrapped in hospital blankets. Claire Victoria Mercer. That's a lot of names. "She's a lot of person," Victoria said softly. "She'll need a strong name." Harrison stood in the doorway watching his daughter hold his granddaughter, and for the first time since Daniel had known him, the older man looked completely at peace. 2 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in January, Daniel and Victoria got married. It wasn't the society wedding that Victoria Hale could have had. No massive venue, no 500 guests, no coverage in business magazines. Instead, it was a small ceremony in the garden of Victoria's house, attended by close friends and family, with Emma as flower girl and baby Claire sleeping peacefully in Harrison's arms. Victoria wore a simple dress from a local boutique. Daniel wore the same suit he'd worn to that first disastrous dinner with her father. Patricia made the cake, Gerald gave a toast about how he'd known from the beginning that they were perfect for each other, which was revisionist history at its finest, but nobody corrected him. Marcus Webb attended with his wife, joking that he'd known investing in Daniel's firm would pay off eventually. Victoria's former assistant Margaret came, along with several Meridian employees who'd followed Victoria from Hale Technologies because they believed in her vision more than they believed in corporate stability. And Maya stood as Daniel's best woman, pulling him aside before the ceremony to say, "Claire would have loved her, the new one, and the woman you're marrying. She would have wanted this for you." "I know," Daniel said, his throat tight. "Then go marry the billionaire CEO and live happily ever after, you lucky idiot." "Former billionaire CEO. She's just regularly rich now. However will you cope, Will?" The ceremony was brief and personal, officiated by a friend of Victoria's who'd known her since college. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about building a life that belonged to them, about choosing each other every day, about raising their daughters to know that courage and kindness mattered more than status or expectations. When it was over, when they'd been pronounced married and had kissed while Emma cheered and Claire slept and everyone applauded, Victoria leaned close and whispered, "We did it." "Did what?" "Built something that's actually ours. Not what anyone expected, but what we chose." "Best terrible decision I ever made," Daniel said. "Same." They celebrated into the evening, dancing in the garden under string lights that Daniel had helped hang, eating cake that was slightly lopsided but delicious, listening to Harrison tell stories about Victoria as a child that made her blush and laugh in equal measure. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Daniel found himself standing on the porch with Emma on one side and Victoria holding Claire on the other, watching the sun set over Charleston. "Daddy?" Emma said. "Yes, sweetheart? Is this what happy ever after looks like?" Daniel looked at his daughter, then at his wife, a word that still felt new and wonderful, then at the baby who bore his first wife's name and represented hope for the future. "Yeah," he said, "I think it is. It's not as fancy as in the princess movies. No, it's not. But I like it better, because it's real." Victoria shifted Claire in her arms and took Daniel's hand. "Smart kid you've got there. She takes after her mother. Both of them." They stood together as the sky turned gold and pink and purple. As Charleston settled into evening, as their life, messy and complicated and nothing like what either of them had planned, continued forward into whatever came next. There would be challenges ahead, Daniel knew. Meridian would face competition and market pressures. His architecture firm would have slow seasons and difficult clients. They'd navigate the chaos of raising two daughters while building their careers. There would be arguments and stress, and moments when everything felt too hard. But they'd also have this, the porch evenings and family dinners, the terrible tea and chocolate chip pancakes, the small moments that built a life worth living. They'd have each other and Emma's endless questions, and Claire's tiny hands grasping at the world, and Harrison's gradual transformation from corporate patriarch to devoted grandfather. They'd have the story of how a knock on a door had changed everything, how a woman with everything had found something more valuable by walking away from it all, how a single father had discovered that love didn't follow timelines or logic or any reasonable plan. They'd have the knowledge that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose what matters over what makes sense, choose yourself over expectations, choose love over fear. As the last of the sunset faded and the first stars appeared, Victoria turned to Daniel with a smile that held everything they'd been through and everything still to come. "Ready to go inside and start our happily ever after?" she asked. Daniel kissed his wife, ruffled his daughter's hair, and looked down at the baby who'd arrived like a promise that life could surprise you in the best possible ways. "Absolutely," he said. "Let's go home." And they did together, into the house on Birchwood Lane where it had all begun, into the life they'd chosen and the future they'd build, into the beautifully imperfect reality of a family that had been formed not by expectations or plans, but by courage, trust, and the quiet decision to choose love over everything else that the world said should matter more.